I'd also like to shout out my dad for being in the Air Force.
I'd like to give a special thanks to my dad, who was a Purple Heart veteran.
I want to give a special thank you to my Uncle Junior and my brother-in-law Johnny for being a veteran because they served in the Air Force.
I would like to give a shout out to my grandpa Paul. He fought in World War II.
I'd like to do a shout out to my uncle Jeremy.
I'd like to do a special thank you and shout out to my grandpa, Mr. Rich.
I'd like to do a shout out to all the veterans that helped us.
For this Veterans Day, I'd like to thank my grandpa, Jack.
I'd like to give a shout out to my dad, Jonathan Zappa, for serving in the Army.
I'd like to give a shout out to my uncle for serving in the military as a field.
I would like to give a shout out to my dad.
Hi, my name's Bishop Banks. I want to thank my grandpa for serving and protecting this country. His name is Otis Banks.
On this Veterans Day, I'd like to give a special shout out to my Uncle Kramer and my cousin, Russell Brooks.
This Veterans Day, I would like to give a big thanks to my Uncle Charles.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to give a thank you to my aunt, Amanda. This Veterans Day, I'd like to give a special thank you to my dad, Brooks.
This Veterans Day, I would like to give a thanks to my Uncle Charles.
This Veterans Day, I give a special thanks to my grandpa.
Hi, my name is Jacob Smith. I love my grandfather. He was a nice sniper and he fought in the military. I love him.
I would like to thank my grandpa, Cal McGrath, for serving in Vietnam, who has passed away down due to cancer. Love you, Grandpa.
Thank you for your service.
I would like to thank Ryan Todd Harris for serving in the Army.
Thank you for your service. I'd like to thank Harry G. Nebel, who was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and served in Vietnam, Sarah Walker, who was in the U.S. Army and was military police in the National Guard, and Sergeant Burton Grimes, who was in the Marine Corps.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to thank my grandpa, Jim Boland, for serving in the Army.
I'd like to thank David McCord for being a CB, Bill Levanti for being inside of the Army, and Robert McCord for being inside the Pearl Harbor attacks and surviving.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to give a shout out to my great uncle Jay, who went to Afghanistan.
I'd like to thank Chaz Liggett, a Purple Heart recipient.
I would like to thank my dad for his service for this country.
I'd like to give a special shout out to my grandpa being in the U.S. Army.
I'd like to give a special shout out to my grandpa Larry Wayne Essery Sr. and my uncle Jonathan Watson.
I'd like to give a special shout out to my dad who served in the Army.
I'd like to thank my grandpa, Danny Ray Wilson, and my dad, Danny Lee Wilson, for serving in the U.S. Army.
Today I appreciate my Grandpa Arthur and my Uncle Riley.
We appreciate all of our veterans this Veterans Day, especially Tom Grodzicki.
I would like to give a shout out to everyone who served and my mom.
I'd like to give out a shout out to my father, Morgan John Inslee.
To our favorite veteran, Mr. Followell.
Thank you for your service.
On this Veterans Day, we'd like to give a special shout out to
My great-grandpa, Ed Cash, and my grandpa, Lauren Marks.
On this Veterans Day, I would like to give a shout out to my dad, Jan Segato.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to thank my grandpa, Gary Hood.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to thank my grandfather, Bud.
On this Veterans Day, I'd like to thank my dad, Joshua.
Veterans Day, we'd like to give a special shout out to
Jim the janitor.
This Veterans Day, we'd like to thank Mr. Followell,
our band and choir director.
On this Veterans Day, we'd like to give a special shout out to my uncles Ed and Jeff.
I'd like to give a shout out to my great-grandpa for serving in the Korean War.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to thank all veterans, especially my grandpa Laverne Sanders.
And my uncle Todd Kaliher. Thank you for serving our country.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to give a shout out to my grandpa.
Thank you for your service.
This Veterans Day, I'd like to give a special shout out and thank you to my uncle Gavin Green, who served in the Marines.
I would like to give a shout out to my dad for serving in the Navy.
This Veterans Day, I want to remember my grandpa who served in the National Guard.
This Veterans Day,
We would like to thank all our veterans
who have died for our country,
such as Philip Overton,